Most of the folks that I talk to in our association agree. They all want the same thing. They want it to be safe. They want to eliminate some of these bad actors because it hurts all of us and it's just going to make it harder for all of us to operate. The most important thing is just safety, right?
This is MedSpa Mayhem, the podcast all about the chaotic world of medical aesthetics. From Botox to lasers to IV bars, learn how to tell real versus fake, legal versus illegal, and safe versus potentially deadly. Hear the crazy stories inside the med spa world and find out what questions to ask and how to spot the people cutting corners. I'm your host, Dr. Kate D. Together, we explore the wild west of medicine that is the aesthetics industry. Hi, this is Dr. Kate D, and I'm here today with Alex Tiersch. He is the founder and CEO of the American Medical Spa Association, or AMSPA. Alex, thanks so much for being here today.
I appreciate you having me. It's great to be here, and congrats on the podcast. I don't know if I should call you Dr. D or Kate.
Does it matter? Either one of those. Known you long enough. I think Kate is just fine. If I can call you Alex, you can call me Kate. So by way of introduction, Alex went to the University of Iowa for his undergraduate degree and then DePaul University for law school and graduated in 2001. So I'm ever so slightly older than you. And he founded the American Medical Spa Association in 2012. So it's actually been 12 years since you started this.
I know. That's crazy to think about. It really is.
It's been a long time. So can you tell our listeners how that got started, your background in healthcare law and all that?
Yeah. So I kind of tongue-in-cheek call myself a recovering lawyer because that's how I...
That's so funny. I call myself a recovering radiologist, so we're in the same kind of weird...
Yeah, that's how I started my career, honestly, and that was my career, my chosen career path and trajectory for the longest time. I was going to be a lawyer. I was a lawyer. I practiced law for, almost 15 years, kind of nonstop, almost 20 years. And then I happened upon this industry through a client who we represented. And it was just a very interesting, fascinating industry to me. And I could see right away that a lot of folks didn't know. I know you talk a lot about some of these unregulated med spas. I mean, this is 2008, probably when I first got into this, and it was truly the Wild West, and that there was just absolutely no real oversight. Nobody knew what to do. And so I started AMSPA selfishly, and I always say this, but it's true, as a kind of a marketing opportunity for my law firm. I had quit my job and opened my own law firm, and I wanted to get clients. I wanted to help folks. So I just started publishing all of this information on things like the corporate practice of medicine and supervision, scope of practice, all those things that I thought people needed help on. And it just kind of, it kind of took off. And then as I started adding additional things, like we started doing boot camps and other educational events, it really kind of took on a life of its own. And before you know it, I was in a position where I either got to double down on this or I'm not going to have enough time. So I kind of stopped practicing law, and I'm doing AMSPA full time. I've got a law firm that helps me with all the other stuff. So it's been really nice and fun to watch this industry progress and grow.
So can you just explain the basics of what AMSPA does?
Yeah. So we are a full-fledged trade association on behalf of the industry. Primarily, we offer resources and products that try to make the industry more compliant and safer. So there's two main things that we do, and one is provide kind of compliance and training. So resources on how to be a compliant med spa, how to run a profitable med spa. But then also we want to provide a connection point where folks around the country, even around the world eventually, there's a place they can go where they can interact with others that are like them. And the next step is to provide that singular unified voice on behalf of the industry and on behalf of med spas, so that as the industry continues to evolve and change, we've got a seat at the table. And right now, as you know, there's a lot of things that are kind of bubbling beneath the surface, and those will eventually have an impact. And we want to make sure as an industry that we are putting our best foot forward and having a voice and making sure that folks are hearing from us and learning about what our needs are and what the best way to operate is and the things that we care about. And if we don't do that, these decisions will be made without us. And sometimes we're not going to like those. So that's primarily what we do. It's a membership-based association. We do a lot of events too. The Medical Spa Show is our big event in Las Vegas in April. And that's 2,000 attendees, just kind of massive and crazy.
Yeah, so I think I first met you at the very first National AMSPA meeting in Vegas. Was that 17? Was it
It
18?
was. Yeah. No, it was.
17.
I want to say it was 17. Yeah.
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 And I have to tell you that you were, and that meeting was a huge influence on me in getting started. So I had founded really my MedSpa at the end of 14, I opened in the beginning of 15, and was on my own, just solo for a year and a half. I went to that first AMSPA meeting shortly after hiring my first injector, who was an RN. And one of the things I talk about a lot in the book and in the podcast is how like people just open up a med spa before they call a lawyer, right? They don't call a lawyer first. They have no idea. And that's me too. I didn't know, right? So I'm an MD, but I really didn't know much about med spa law. So I go to the first AMSPA meeting, and one of the many things I learned at that meeting was very educational, was that I was very legal, compliant, except for one big thing, and that my new RN seeing new patients, and that was not okay. And I was alarmed and I kind of freaked out. I'm like, oh my God, I have to see every single patient first. And she had not been doing that. She had been working for dermatologists for 12 years, seeing patients on her own. And she had basically no intention of working with me to provide a good faith exam. So our did not work out so well. But I was really grateful in finding that out kind of early in my experience.
That's nice. It's nice to hear.
So I feel like one of the big things that AMSPA does is help people learn about the laws and helping them to figure out how to be legally compliant.
Yeah. That's the thing that we hang our head on, right? And it's not surprising, I guess, because I'm a lawyer and that's where my background is. So the skeleton of what we've built over the years has always been based upon the legalities in your particular state, the very, very specific and sometimes unclear compliance rules that everyone has to follow. And the story that you told was interesting because at that time, and even now, unfortunately, that was a very common setup. And it wasn't because people didn't know. It's just, or people wanted to do it wrong. They honestly didn't know. And I can't tell you how many conversations I had with folks, RNs as well as physicians, who didn't know that. And once you explain it and try to, kind of steer them in the right direction as far as why this is true, why the law exists in this way, what the practice of medicine is, what the scope of practice of RNs are, most of the time they get it. Unfortunately, there definitely are instances, like you mentioned, where folks just don't want to hear it. And to some extent, I feel for them a little bit because I do and I don't, right? They've been practicing a certain way for a long time, often very successfully. And all of a sudden you've got somebody coming along saying, hey, you're not doing it right. You got to change your whole business model. It's going to impact your profitability. It's going to impact your margins, how you do business. And that's really tough to adjust to, especially when everyone else is also not doing it correctly, right? There's a price to pay to be compliant. And so really my whole goal for the past 10 years, it has just been to start making folks aware of what the rules are so that we can all start operating on a level playing field. Because right now we're not. And it's hard to compete with folks who are cutting corners.
Yeah, tremendously hard. Their costs are obviously much lower. I will say I think that a big problem is lack of enforcement of the laws, but they do get enforced sporadically. And I remember when I had Brad Adato on here, who you know quite well. He's a healthcare attorney and has been practicing med spa law for a really long time. But, he made a very specific point that just because everybody's doing it illegally doesn't mean that you're going to get away with it. And if you are the one who does get caught, you're completely hosed, whether or not other people are doing it or not. So I do think also that the enforcement wave is coming. I think that the case in Texas last year, and I did my very first podcast episode was on that case, but that really raised awareness, and not just amongst people in med spas and politics, but all over the country. People are writing about that and other cases of really bad outcomes. So I do think there's going to be a lot more enforcement coming in waves over the next few years.
There will. And unfortunately, what we've seen is the enforcement, and not just the enforcement, the regulation and the legislation of the industry happens in response to events like that. And the response tends to be swift and oftentimes overreaching because, for obvious reasons, something like that happens. The obvious response is, oh my God, this needs to be stopped, right? So that's one of the reasons that we're so adamant right now. We're working so hard to get as many folks to recognize what's going on, because oftentimes that response is kind of behind the scenes and you don't really know it's happening until it's too late. And sometimes it can have really difficult and oftentimes devastating consequences on a particular state. Alabama doesn't allow PAs to inject at all and to do certain things. There's some wonky laws like that.
Do they allow RNs to inject, but not PAs?
It's PAs are so excluded. And it's just, there's several examples of that where these states have just very strange, and it's all in relation to a law that was put in effect in response to something. And then it's just kind of a battle of the lobbyists, who has the most money,
right,
who has the most access. And that's not the way it should be. And so we need to make sure that we have a seat at the table.
Yeah, I totally agree. I mean, as a physician, I have to say that there are certain things that frighten me a lot more than other things. Proliferation of IV bars has me the most scared, because there's no quicker way to kill somebody than to hang the wrong thing, or to hang something that someone has an anaphylactic response to and you have no ability to treat it. And these IV bars are popping up in like hotels and concerts and, all kinds of venues where there's no medical backup. There's no medical person there at all. A lot of times the people putting the IV in aren't even nurses. So I happen to sit on a plane next to a guy who organizes big concerts, and he asked me about what I did, and I told him, wait, about the IV thing, what? And he kind of freaked out, because he arranges these IVs for not only the concert goers, but like the various performers and stuff. And because God knows what, they're getting done behind the stage.
That's been tough. The IV, and I didn't realize just kind of how big the IV market was, but there's a lot of these places that have popped up. And I think what's tough about it is that for some reason, and to me, that IVs, you're putting an IV into somebody's vein, you're injecting something into their body. Like, clearly that is the practice of medicine. But for whatever reason, it's kind of slipped through. And there's a lot of people who just think that it's routine. And so you've got folks who are paramedics. So, I'm a paramedic, I can put an IV on the scene. So therefore and it's just not how it works. And so that's been kind of troubling. We're starting to see that. I think we're seeing a shift in everything, including enforcement, which I think, frankly, we need more enforcement to make it a level playing field.
Yeah. Well, that cannot come soon enough in my book, especially for things that can kill you. I mean, the things that can scar you, okay, you're going to at least survive that. The things that can kill you, like potentially botulism from fake Botox or an IV, which will just immediately kill you.
Right.
There is a case, I don't know if you heard about this, and this wasn't publicized. So this is a friend of a friend told me about this. ER doc saw a patient who almost died because they ordered Ozempic off the internet, and it was a fake Ozempic. It was insulin. So think about that, right? So I know. God. So there's always some new ridiculous thing that could potentially kill you. So I hope that people at home know this is real stuff, right? This is not just how pretty are you and do you have a little temporary droopy eyebrow.
That's unbelievable that I'm still amazed that people do that, because, and the interesting thing I was thinking when you were talking about that story is that one thing that really is problematic is that while we're seeing enforcement, we're seeing an increased kind of oversight and attention paid to this industry. One of the things that I've noticed is that the medical boards and a lot of the enforcement agencies that are doing the enforcement and the regulation in the states don't know what MedSpas do. And they are very misguided in terms of what is something they need to be looking into. And the result of that is we've had a lot of license investigations on things that were trivial when you think about it in the grand scheme of things. There was no danger of any patient care or any patients being harmed. Everything was followed to the T. It was just one little thing that the medical boards just didn't seem to understand because they didn't get it. And so it's also, not only is the enforcement lacking, it's uneven. It's not always focused on the problem. The problem is what you're just talked about. People buying counterfeit product, people performing medical procedures who aren't trained or authorized to do so. That's what we need to be focused on. There's a lot of other stuff that gets looked into that just doesn't make sense to me. So that's something we have to work on as well.
Yeah, I think because you can buy anything on the internet, that so you can buy supplies and they may or may not be legitimate. You're definitely buying them illegally. I'm on another forum on Facebook where there are non-medical people talking about how they do semaglutide practices, and they're ordering for laboratory use only semaglutide salts off the internet that don't require a medical license, that kind of thing. And they're just mixing it up and injecting it in people as though that were some safe thing. And I don't think people have any idea how dangerous that is. So I very much focus here in educating consumers on what questions to ask to figure out whether this person's legit or not. But let's get back to AMSPA, because I was really hoping to just get a little bit more from you just about how many members you have and who are the members. Are they doctors? Are they nurses? Are they business people? They're probably a giant mix of all of those things. And I'm just curious to know about your educational programs for your members.
Yeah, it's all of the above, right? When we first started, we were primarily focused on med spa owners. So folks who wanted to open a med spa, and that was, typically a combination of either physicians, nurses, PPs, or business people, including a bunch of plastic surgeons and derms and just some of these larger med spa chains. What we found, though, is that a lot of the needs are really on the individual level. So we've started focusing more on, okay, how do we get individual practitioners and providers to join? What resources can we provide for them? Right now, we have all inclusive, a little over 4,000 members, which is about 3,000 med spas throughout the country, give or take. And most of them are kind of smaller, single owner, single location, the mom and pop type, which is really 97% of the industry is like that. We also have all the kind of the larger chains have become members. But really there's a bunch of things that we offer, but all of them relate towards the compliance and business side of med spas. How do we elevate the med spa industry safely and responsibly? We realize that this is a business opportunity for a lot of folks, right? There's most of the industry are physicians like you who came from other verticals, other practices. And for whatever reason, we're a little disinterested in continuing that line of work and got into aesthetics. And that tends to be, the overwhelming factor for all providers, whether it's PAs, NPs, or RNs. They all come from somewhere else. Usually they don't come from an aesthetic trained background. So we want to make sure
there is no residency in aesthetics, and
that's one of the big things.
Yeah. And even in plastics and derm, there's very little cosmetic training in residencies, if any. And certainly zero when I was doing residency, because it didn't exist then. So obviously people are coming from all other walks of life into aesthetics because it's fun and it's exciting. It makes people happy. The rest of medicine isn't always the happiest place to be.
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. I've heard that story so many times. And I think what's been interesting about this industry and how AMSPA has been, very fortunate, is that the industry has been really grown, and the safe med spas have been built by people like you, because they are physicians or providers from other verticals. It's not plastic surgery. And when I remember back in 2008 or whatever, when med spas were really starting to pick up steam, it was all the surgeons and the dermatologists. They were the ones that this is going to be our industry. We're going to take this over. And they didn't, and some of the big pharma and big manufacturers didn't really realize that's not how it went. How it went was folks wanted to be able to feel good about coming to their jobs, and physicians didn't like billing insurance. They don't like dealing with the administration of hospitals and large practices. They wanted to have their own brand, right? Have their own brand and be able to treat patients. And so it's exploded because of those, we call them non-core physicians, but it's these non-aesthetically trained physicians, at least in their residencies, because there is no residency, there is no board certification for aesthetics. It's only plastics and derms, and everyone else just has to learn, and you have to take classes and study up on it. So that's what we want to provide, is education that helps people improve their businesses, improve the safety of their injectable practices and the safety of what they're doing with energy devices. So all of our education is geared towards that. Succeed at business, be compliant and legal, and be safe.
Yeah. And I would say that my opinion about why the non-core docs like me and anybody who did this really well but focused on customer service, I think that's why we have been successful, because traditionally in medicine, and this is true whether you're a doctor or a lawyer or
Mm-hmm.
a school teacher, it's a nightmare dealing with traditional medicine, right? Like you're on hold for half an hour before you even get a person, and then that person can't really help you.
Yeah.
And then you end up, and just navigating the healthcare system is such a disaster. And I think
Mm-hmm.
that the huge advantage of those of us who are just sort of out of that, if we focus on customer service, that's all we care about, is making sure the person gets taken care of. So traditionally, those kind of, I mean, not saying all the plastics and derms, but traditionally, they have a more medical practice where you can't get through on the front desk and they don't return your phone calls. And, customer service is not necessarily their number one. So I
Mm-hmm.
think that when we're focused on really each individual patient and just making sure they're taken care of, I
Yeah,
think that's why we've succeeded. And that,
I
I think
agree.
that's true of doctors and non-doctors, no matter what, as
Sure.
long as you're providing super high quality service and you're efficient and
Yeah.
caring.
I think what's interesting to me, and I've always found this fascinating, because even up through about 5 years ago or so, I would talk to plastic surgeons and some dermatologists, and they would be like, they would say, don't understand why anybody wants to open a med spa. It's a terrible business model. It doesn't work. Nobody makes any money. It just, and it was as they were saying that, I'm just sitting there going, like, you guys, you just, not trying to be disrespectful, but you don't get it. You don't understand the business model. And I think what's always been interesting is the physicians like yourself, these kind of non-core other residency board certified physicians that have come into the industry, they have figured it out. And I think in large part it's because of the exact thing that you were saying. They understand that it's about patient experience. Whenever we do a poll and say, what's the most important thing to your success? Patient experience is always number one. But the other thing
100%.
is that these plastic surgeons and derms, they have, it's not their focus, right? They have other things. They're doing plastic surgery, they're doing dermatology, they're doing these other verticals as well. And so they're not able to just put 100% of their focus on building the non-surgical aesthetic side. Whereas you, that's what you did. It was your life. You had to make it work. You had to understand how it worked in order to survive. And so it's this whole different, I think, in their mind, very unexpected turn of events that has led to this massive industry that is
Yeah.
dominated by non-surgeons. And so I think that's very healthy too.
Yeah, I think that the traditional model, there's a dermatology practice that I'm very familiar with that they just kind of don't answer their phones. They don't get back to you. They're
Yeah.
booked way out. When I first started, I called them like, oh, hey, how much is Botox and when can I get in? They were booked 4 months out for Botox, which is
Yeah.
longer than Botox lasts, right? So, you couldn't get in there. And then they purchased a body sculpting device that, having researched all the body sculpting devices, I thought, well, I would never buy that one. That one kind of is not like the one to go with if you knew the physiology of it. And I just laughed because I was like, well, in order to book that machine, you're going to have to answer your phone. And so I don't understand. Okay, you just spent all that money on that machine that what may or may not have been the best business decision, but then you're not answering your phone. So how are you going to
Yep.
book that? But anyway, I digress. I also know you do a fair amount now of training on the clinical side. I've been really impressed with that. That's grown quite a bit since I've known you. And you now have that anatomy, the cadaver class.
Yeah.
What made you go ahead and partner with them. I thought that was a great idea.
Yeah, well, it's been amazing to see. So the Academy for Injection Anatomy, AIA is what it's called, and was a company that was owned by Dr. Chris Surik, who's a anatomist and a plastic surgeon. He's just an anatomy geek. He'll say that himself. And what we always wanted to get into the clinical training because I think it's important in terms of safety, but at the same time, that is not something that I have any expertise in, or really anybody on my team did. So I didn't think it was necessarily right for us to go in and start teaching on clinical stuff. So we wanted to go out and find the best of the best, and we did. We think Chris Surik is an incredible physician and an incredible teacher. He's got so much energy. He's very young, and he created this course, this cadaver course, that was very unique in that you had a bunch of anatomy training in the classroom setting, and then the students, there's a very limited number of students, like 4 students, 4 attendees to a cadaver specimen, and they each then got to inject and they got to dissect down and learn the anatomy that way. And so there was a ton of attention paid to that. And so we went out and actually acquired that business, and they've now been part of what we do, and we're continuing to grow that. We're very excited about that. It's nowadays it's really tough to find or to determine. I'm sure you can attest to this too. Like, it's tough to determine what a good training course is because there's so many of them. There's just hundreds,
and there's a lot of crap courses out there.
And there's a lot of really bad ones, right?
When I was first starting, there was a Botox course that was popular and came around, and it literally was taught by a non-medical person who is like an accountant who gets up there and starts talking, and it's, oh my God.
Yeah. It's really, and again, some of them are very good. And so it's tough, but one of the things we've struggled with, frankly, and we're trying to overcome, as we go into next year, is how do we, because I know that the course that Chris Surik puts on is top notch, top of the line. It's probably some of the best anatomy training you can get when it comes to facial anatomy. But how do we show that? And how do we get people to notice the good ones from the bad ones? And how do we differentiate? Because it's really easy to put up a course and to start and to get people to come. And if you're not teaching it right, and most of them aren't teaching any of the compliance angle either. So they're teaching folks do stuff that might not be able to do it legally in the real world.
Right. What do you think about these weekend courses that are training, that basically will train anybody who walks in the door, medical or non-medical? What do you think about
that? So we don't train. You can't come to unless you are an RN or above. So you have to at least be an RN. So it's RN, NPs, MDs, DOs. Now we do make some exceptions if there's some folks who come from other countries. There has been very few exceptions to that, but those types of courses, I think one of the things that I'm working on now is I think the industry side of things, like not only the trainers, but also the pharma companies and the manufacturers, they need to do a better job of explaining who can and cannot operate or use their machines and inject their drugs, because the same way they'll train anybody too. There's oftentimes, if you go to an injectable course put on by one of the big injectable companies, they're not necessarily going to check to see, who's licensed or who's not licensed. And I think that's a disservice. But I also think that the training companies that are putting those courses on need to be better educated themselves. And they need to know that what they're telling their students is potentially harmful and it could get them in trouble. And there just doesn't seem to be much care about that. They'll train anybody, and whatever happens to you, that's not my problem. That's kind of what they say.
Yeah. I don't know if there's any regulation about these training courses. I was under the impression that there's that one in Texas I talked about with Brad, where they're training anyone who walks in the door over a weekend, and they're promising that they will find them a quote unquote medical director. And according to Brad, that was founded by a lawyer.
So doesn't surprise me.
I just find that, to me, is that like legal malpractice? It should be, but
there's so much wrong. These weekend courses, I'm sure they drive you nuts too. There's so much wrong with it. Like you can't learn enough in a weekend to do anything.
No.
And There's not only that, but then also just there's no real thought to, okay, how is this going to advance the safety of the industry if you're just training everybody and then you just let them loose and they think they can do it now. And anyone who's been an injector like yourself or has been in the business, you know that it takes more than a weekend to
Oh my
learn how
God.
to
Well, I
do it.
mean, I of course had all of medical school and residency, as you may or may not know, but radiologists are experts in anatomy. Everyone else knows their subset of anatomy. We have to do everything in all different cross sections and every different modality. But just the idea of a non-medical person coming in and sticking needles in people and not knowing what they're going to hit, they just don't realize there's a lot of important structures under there, and you could really maim somebody or blind them or disfigure them forever, and they just don't even know the
They
risks
don't.
that
Yeah.
they're taking. Anyway, so I'm just curious, what are your goals for AMSPA over the next year, 5 years, and where do you think the industry's headed?
It's a good question. And the goals for AMSPA have changed as time has gone by. We were talking earlier about how it's been 12 years, which is just, that's mind boggling that we've been around for that long. So the first iteration was really trying to educate and to let everybody know that these laws existed, that med spa treatments consist of the practice of medicine, and we need to be better about being compliant and legal. And we've done a good job of that, but we're still lacking in that area too. There's still so many folks out there who don't know. But I think what we're focused on now is, number one, we have to grow. We have to grow our membership, because the only way that we are going to be able to have an impact on any level in a particular state or nationally, if there's some federal regs that come up, is to have enough of a presence and enough kind of manpower to go in and say, this is the industry. Right now we have 3,000 med spas roughly. By our estimation, there's 12,000 in the country, which means we're not even close to representing everybody. And I think a lot
I'm
of folks
curious,
don't even
is
know
that
that.
number, the 12,000, does that address all the super illegal people who are operating completely outside the system, no license, no nothing?
It could. So the way that we
How do
counted
you
that
estimate that?
is it's based upon, so there's a lot of things. We had a company that a statistical company did the research for us, but it's based upon responses to surveys that we send out, population, and then estimates about we take certain demographic areas and find the number of med spas in there, and you extrapolate it out. But it's meant to be businesses that identify as non-surgical aesthetics practices. So it doesn't count a dermatologist who offers Botox, like you were talking about before. It doesn't count a plastic surgeon who's a plastic surgery office who also has a clinic that offers injectables. In order for that to count, it has to be its own brand, its own, like, I am a med spa that is attached to a plastic surgery office, but it's its own med spa. So
Okay.
undoubtedly there's some that have that are non-compliant. I will say this though, and this is one thing that I'm trying to really get at with the medical board investigators in the states, is that there absolutely are a number of these non-compliant, unqualified, really unsafe med spas that are operating. There's no question that these businesses have popped up and they're operating kind of with impunity, and they've been doing it for a long time. I will say though, it is really, it's a small number. Most of the med spas are run by providers, and they are run by either RNs, PAs, NPs, MDs, whatever it is. Some of them are not 100% compliant, and they're doing things that need to be addressed, but they are at least run by medically trained professionals. And which, again, I think is a low bar for us to hit. But what I want to focus on, right, is the other ones that are the non-medically trained people. They have an outsized impact on all of us, because when they do something wrong or something stupid, like happened in Texas, happened in New Mexico with the
For the
microneedling and
HIV
the spread of
cases.
HIV, like, those are outliers. The instances of something that bad happening are very small. And when it does happen, it's because of these kind of rogue med spas that just are operating with impunity, and it hurts all of it. It hurts you up in Washington.
But
Something
it hurts
happens in Florida.
everybody. I mean, and I will say though, I think that number is really hard to measure.
For
So
sure.
if you haven't listened, my episode 17 was this story of this young woman who went to an unlicensed spa in California. And I know that people talk about California as though it were really highly regulated compared to other states. But this person is completely unlicensed, ordering product off of Alibaba, injecting it in people, and was never prosecuted. And this girl almost died. She ordered tainted product off of the internet and spread mycobacterium all over this girl's body, and she's scarred for life, and she's in the hospital for 3 months. So I just think that those places are so far under the radar, we don't know about them. And then I think that people who are harmed by them, a lot of people are really just ashamed to come forward because they're like, I did this to myself. I went to this place. I didn't look into it. I had no idea. That is what the DA said to this girl. So the prosecutor refused to prosecute and told her, well, you went there of your own accord. And
that's not right.
I know. I mean, it's people trust that when they walk into a place and it looks legit, that it's going to be legit. So how can you tell?
Yeah. And I think that we've talked about this at length in the past. I think one of the things that we want to do moving into next year at AMSPA is really start an aggressive public relations campaign. Like how do we inform the public what a safe, compliant med spa is? And then does that lead to some sort of a credential or a stamp of approval or something on a particular med spa? But even if that's not what comes of it, the patients need to know. They need to know what questions to ask. And when a red flag comes up, they need to know what that red flag is. And a lot of times they don't. They're just trusting. Trusting the med spa.
Yeah, I mean, but even lawyers don't know. I mean,
and doctors.
Just had no idea, like, oh, I didn't realize that was even possible, right? I thought somebody's policing this. My personal opinion is that we need to have some kind of accreditation so that people can just see, oh, okay, that's certified. That means they're doing all the basic things legally. It doesn't mean they're fantastic necessarily at it, but that's what reviews are for. But legal, I think that's so important so that people will be able to tell by the label, oh, it's like organic. Or back in breast center world where I used to live, you had to go through accreditation every year and show that you were doing everything properly. Any place you go get a mammogram is regulated by the federal government, and they will be put out of operation if they're not doing it properly. And I think that we need something like that in the med spa space. I don't know how that's going to come about, but I think.
Well, I don't think it's that far off. I think it's just going to take folks like you, which is the majority. Like most of the folks that I talk to in our association agree. They all want the same thing. They want it to be safe. They want to eliminate some of these bad actors because it hurts all of us and it's just going to make it harder for all of us to operate. The most important thing is just safety, right? Like the med spa has to be safe. They have to know how to handle sometimes severe complications that can come up. They're rare, thankfully. But when they happen, you've got to know what to do, and you've got to have the right trained staff and the protocols and the equipment and the drugs on hand to be able to address it.
Exactly.
And that's the main thing. I mean, like we could talk all day about, are they 100% compliant in everything that they do? Well, and I've yet to find any med spa that's 100% compliant. Everybody has something that they need to work on, right? Whether it's OSHA or HIPAA or something, but at least be able to handle something when it does come up. That's the most important thing, because that's what's going to kill this industry if we don't get it under control. Because the more of that happens, I can see, I mean, this is my biggest fear, a celebrity, and it becomes front page news. And all of a sudden you've got the US Congress and their infinite wisdom coming in and trying to do something. And typically what's going to happen is that's going to be something that just doesn't address the real problem, and it does things, and it's going to be detrimental to our industry. So we have to get it under control ourselves.
I totally agree. It should be voluntary, and it should be like the highest quality. That's our goal, no matter what, right?
Well, and you're doing that. You're kind of taking up the good fight. So it's been great to see, because honestly, and I mean this with all due respect to the plastic physicians of the world, some of the worst offenders that I've seen for med spas have been med spas owned and run by plastic surgeons. because
Really?
and it's not because they're doing it on purpose, but they're so busy doing surgery and other things in their brand that they end up having RNs or unlicensed people
Yeah.
handling everything. And they just don't, and they don't know, they don't
I
even
don't think
know
they
that
know.
they don't know that it's not right.
Yeah, I heard about a med spa in general Northwest area that was run by RNs that had nobody higher than that in the whole place. And I heard that this plastic surgeon I knew was supposedly their medical director. And
Mm-hmm.
I called him. I was like, "Do you know you're the medical director?" And he was like, "Oh gosh, I was doing a favor for my friend who's the RN, but that was months ago. She was hiring a medical director, oh, I better follow up on that." And of course, the
Mm-hmm.
RN never did. And so he had no idea that his license was still being used
Yeah.
and that it was that big a risk. He didn't really understand the laws to start with. And he's, oh crap, I got to fix this.
Yeah.
And
That's
and
pretty
that
shitty.
wasn't even his own practice. And I'm like, just hire an NP to work in your place. And in our state, NPs have independent practice authority and they can be medical directors in Washington state. But
Mm-hmm.
they don't even realize that, right? So they have a team of RNs and stuff, and that's not kosher, right? Nobody
Yeah.
to do
No,
the
it's
faith
definitely
exam.
not.
So, Alex, it's been great. I always ask this question at the end of every interview. What one piece of advice would you give our listeners?
Of a listener you are. You're a patient or you're a provider. But I think for me, I think when it comes to the world of aesthetics, all of this information is out there and it's discoverable. It's just not easy necessarily to discover. And so what we've tried to do with the American Med Spa Association, americanmedspa.org, by the way, is to try to consolidate and summarize and crystallize this information so that folks can understand it. And we struggle with it ourselves because it's not easy. Until we as an industry, whether you were a patient and you need to demand that the places you go to follow the rules and are safe and compliant. If you're a provider, you need to demand that the place you work at follows the rules, is safe and compliant. Or if you're a business owner, until we as an industry start self-regulating, for lack of a better word, like really taking this as our own responsibility and making sure that we as an industry are safe. If we don't do that, it's going to be done for us. And when it's done for us by outside factors, we're not going to like it. It's not going to be in tune with how the industry works. It's going to impact a lot of businesses. It's going to restrict a lot of things, and it's going to make it harder. And it's going to make the industry, I think, less, maybe not less safe, but less accessible, and certainly, and just not, probably less safe too. So no matter where you are in the food chain, for lack of a better word, like we need to learn what constitutes a safe med spa and where you should be going, what questions you should be asking, how you should be following up, what types of experience, what's the scope of practice for the physicians and the RNs that are doing the treatments. What does that all look like? And until we do that, that's just the most basic thing. And unfortunately, I still, to this day, I've been giving the same lecture to physicians about scope of practice and aesthetics since 2008. It's the same one, talking about good faith exam, RN's involvement. And even today, after 15, almost 20 years, I'm still getting people looking back at me and saying, I didn't know that. Wow, I did not know that.
Yeah.
And it's, which is just amazing to me, but we've got to keep going. We can't stop.
And I just 100% agree with you. And that is why I felt so compelled to write the book and start this podcast. And I'm hoping that with more self-governance and this kind of change, my book and podcast will become obsolete eventually. So that would be great. Meanwhile, definitely ask those questions and make sure that any place you go is really operating legally and safely. Anyway,
Yeah.
Alex, thank you so much for being here today. I so appreciate your coming on the podcast to talk about this stuff.
Well, thanks for having me, and congrats to you. The book, the podcast, all of that is amazing. It's well needed, and it's very much appreciated on our end that there's folks like you out there. So thanks for having me, and I can't wait to come back.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Alex. If you've learned something and like what we're doing, please tell your friends and give us a 5-star rating in your podcast app. If you have a question or a crazy story of your own you'd like to share, please send an email or voice recording to info@drkatedee.com. That's DRKATEDEE.com. Or reach us through the website medspamayhem.com. And read the book. MedSpa Mayhem is available everywhere books are sold. Thanks for listening. This has been MedSpa Mayhem with Dr. Kate D. We are so grateful you're listening, and we hope you've learned at least one fun or possibly disturbing fact today. Don't forget to hit subscribe on your podcast app and leave us a 5-star review. And read the book. MedSpa Mayhem is available everywhere books are sold. Links and more can be found in the show notes and on medspamayhem.com.